Let me begin by introducing my fellow panelists. First, we are fortunate to have with us Ms. Deepika Singh. She is an executive director of Chugh LLP. She is an immigration expert in the Silicon Valley, and she has handled immigration matters across spectrum, whether it's CAs or even software companies. I would like to begin by asking questions, but there's a disclaimer that I must say. None of us on this panel are providing any kind of professional advice. It's merely to provide you education and information. If you so decide to pursue a strategy for immigration or education, please consult licensed experts. With this, I'll turn on to Deepika. Deepika, thank you for being with us. And let me begin by asking the first question. It's a very basic question. What are the visas that an Indian chartered accountant can explore for the United States to launch their careers? Deepika.
First, Nilesh, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this wonderful panel. Well, yes, US is definitely one of the big countries where people would want to come and explore their careers. So if the goal is to work in the United States, the two main visas which someone could explore would be the H-1B and the L-1. There are some other visas as well which can be explored to perform work here, but they have limitations. But the H-1B and the L-1 are the most apt for any individual who wants to come to the United States and work. There are other visa categories as well which give you work authorization, but you have to belong to a certain country's, or you have to be a national of a certain country. There is a visa called the E3 visa, which is categorically for Australian citizens, meaning if you are a passport holder of Australia, you can explore this visa. You can come to the United States and actually work on this visa. There is another one called the H1B1, which are for the Singaporeans and the Chileans. Now, when I say national of this country, meaning that you can hold a passport for this country. You don't have to be born in this country. You just have to have a passport or be a citizen of this country. In a similar way, if you're a Canadian and a Mexican holding the passport of Canada or Mexico, you can explore the TN visa. That's another one which is another app for working in the United States. With any of these visa categories, you can actually get an EAD and explore work authorization in the United States. These are all temporary visas, and to file them, you have to meet certain requirements. But yes, these are some of the options which you have to have visa options. You have to come and work in the United States.
Thank you, Deepika. I have a question. You mentioned H-1B visa and L-1 visa. So how are they different? And what do we in India, or rather what do chartered accountants in India have to do to get one or the other?
Right. So the first requirement, so I'll go with one visa over the other, right? So first I'll talk about the H-1B. Now, what is an H-1B? For the H-1B, the main requirement is first, it is sponsored by a US entity performing work in the United States, means it's in business. It has physical presence in either any city or state in the United States, and they have to sponsor the H-1B for you. Now, the main criteria for you to obtain an H-1B is first, you have to have an offer of employment from the US entity. Second, the minimum education requirement to perform or to apply for this visa is bachelor's degree, meaning that whichever occupation you're going to perform your job duties in, the requirement for the basic is a bachelor's degree. So, the immigration attorneys can help you all evaluate it, and, they can help you, tell you whether you qualify and what is a good designation. So H-1B, basically, these are the two main requirements. For the L, the requirements are a little different. Education is not really a mere requirement for the L. The most important thing for the L visa is that you have to have a US entity, again, in business practice, physical presence in the US in any city and state, and they have to have a related entity in a foreign country. It could be anywhere in the world other than US, obviously, and the relationship could be either an affiliate or a branch or a parent or a subsidiary. So the relationship has to be there between the US entity and the foreign entity. The second requirement for an L visa is that the employee who's trying to get the L visa has to have worked for the foreign entity for at least 1 year, meaning they have to have a payroll from that entity in order to kind of correspond that they have been employed with that particular entity, foreign entity, and they meet the minimum requirement. Now, the difference between the H-1B and the Ls is that H-1B, you have a a maximum period of 6 years, meaning you can obtain an H1B for 6 years in continuation. Whereas the L1, it's divided into two categories. One is the L1A and one is the L1B. L1A is majorly for managers, executives, and functional managers. So when I say managers, means you have to be a people manager, meaning you have people reporting to you. When I say executive, means you are somebody in the organization, in the foreign entity, who's taking decisions on behalf of who's going to take decisions on behalf of the US entity. So you're on an executive level. When I say function, meaning that you're coming to the United States to actually own a function and supervise it, manage it, and so on and so forth. So L1A, you get a total of 7 years on the L1A in the United States. You have to keep filing extensions up to 7 years. For the L1B, it is more for individual contributors, meaning that you're coming independently to work in the US, meeting the basic requirement of the relationship of the foreign entity plus the 1 year employment with the overseas entity. But your United States employment is basically for an individual contribution. So for example, to give you an idea of what individual contributor would be, like, people, software engineers, when they come to the US, they're coming and performing individual work. So those are the ones who qualify for the L1B. Very specialized knowledge, very, you have technical knowledge about the process and methodologies of the entity, and that's what you're going to perform in the United States. So these are the criterias to meet the L requirement, and that is how the H and L are different for the primary beneficiary. Now, for the H1B, you can the dependents, meaning the spouses and the children, can get an H4, and for the L1s, the dependents can get an L2 visa. For the H4, there is a work authorization, which probably you can explore over the years once your green card is in process. But for the L2s, when they come to the United States, they can immediately apply for an L2 EAD authorization. So this is how both the visa categories are different.
Thank you, Deepika. I know you used the magic word green card for the first time, and I'm sure a lot of people were waiting to hear about that. But before we jump into this whole green card train, let me step back and ask you a question which a lot of people ask me. It's a simple question. They say that I am an independent chartered accountant in India. I'm not an employee of any company, or I do not expect to become an employee of a large company in India. I'm self-employed in India. I am keen to launch my professional practice in the United States. What are my options to launch my practice without having to seek an employment with a large organization or a small organization in the United States who's going to do my L1, H1, or some other visa category? How do I launch my practice? They say that, I have this B1, B2 business visa. Why can't I launch my practice on this B1, B2? It's a very basic question, but I think it's important for us to address it before we get into the green card and all those issues.
Correct. So technically, if you want to launch your practice, the only visa which will help you to do that would be an L1A. So the L1A category has the option of filing a new office L1A, meaning that you have you have an India entity or a foreign entity, and you're trying to come and open an office in the US where both these entities will have a relationship. Now, the relationship could either be a branch, subsidiary, or a parent or an affiliate. Now, I won't explain what a branch or a parent or a subsidiary would be, because you all already know about it. But I will tell you all what an affiliate means, because that's a little different word here when it comes to relationship. Affiliate means that both the owners of the US entity and the India entity or the foreign entity are the same, means they hold the equal amount of shares. So if both the offices meet this requirement, the L1A is the best way to launch your office in the United States. In the long term, you have to show that you're opening a US office, you're going to establish it, you're going to have business activity, you're going to grow it, you're going to hire people. So a business plan has to be presented to USCIS along with your application to exactly tell them what your ideas are about, future of opening this office in the US. So L1A is definitely one of the best options to start your US operations. There is EB5, which obviously is a great option, but then for an EB5, it's a lot of documentation. You need assistance from a corporate lawyer, from a CPA, and an immigration attorney to work on your case. So I would recommend, if anybody wants to explore the EB5, take a good consultation before you start the process. You need to understand how this whole EB5 works. H1B is not a great idea to start a new operations or launch an office in the US, because H1B is a little more restricted to the US employer. You can't work for your own company. So there are restrictions. There is conflict of interest. So H1B is definitely not a good option. If you want to launch your practice in the US, L1A is the best option, and talk to an immigration attorney and they can guide you as to how you can explore that option. Now, B1, B2 visas are restricted. This visa category is basically was created for you to make temporary visits to the United States or for business or leisure purpose. Now, when you say B1, it's primarily for business. When you say B2, it's leisure, meaning you're coming here for vacation or, kind of leisure time, spending leisure time in the US or for medical reasons. When you say B1, you're primarily coming here for business meetings. You cannot come and work in the United States. And I very categorically tell you all, you cannot work on a B1 visa, meaning any billable work cannot be performed on a B1 visa. So if you're coming to the United States, it should primarily be for meetings, any kind of knowledge transfer. And, people usually send employees from their from their foreign entity to the US entity for knowledge transfer. So that visa can be explored for those reasons. But any billable work on a B1 visa cannot be done. If you want to come and just explore the options of opening an office in the US, that can be done on a B1 visa, but it primarily should limit to only meetings.
Great, thanks. While we're on the topic of EB5, I would just like to highlight one thing, that EB5 also involves a significant amount of investment into a commercial enterprise in the United States, $900,000, which have to remain invested for a period of at least 5 to 7 years, depending upon how much time it takes you to get to the visa situation. So right. It's not just an investment decision; it's an investment and immigration decision that people have to look at. Exactly. However, though, does EB5 have an advantage that you technically enter with a green card? So, as you know, you could be in India or wherever you are while your life is continuing and your visa is getting processed, and the day when it gets sanctioned, you simply fly in here and get your green card. So that's an advantage, but then there are costs associated with that. There's also an option I have heard of, an E2 visa, which is the treaty investor visa, which is slightly more complex, where people invest in some other countries to gain passports of those countries and use that to get work permit in the United States. So, but these are complex options. If you guys, any of your listeners or webcast viewers are evaluating it, do consult experts before you do this. Now let's jump into, without much further ado, into green card, right? Everybody wants to know, how do I get a green card? So can you talk a little bit about what is this green card? And you also use the words EAD. So how does that differ from green card?
Perfect. So the H1B, the L2 visa category and the dependents do get an EAD to work in the US. Now, for the L1s, as I said, their dependents can come into the United States and apply for an EAD and start working with any company they want in the US. But for the H4s, the dependents of the H1B, the H1B has to be in the green card process for their H4s to actually avail this option. So far, EADs are getting issued. USCIS has not rescinded the H4 EAD option. I mean, it is in talks, definitely, but so far it's been 4-5 years and people are comfortably using H4 EADs to work. Now, how do you get an H4 EAD? You have to be in the green card process. The primary beneficiary has to be in the green card process. And how do you be in the green card process? So the employment-based category of the green card allows you to go into the start off with the PERM process, then the I-140 process, which is the immigrant visa, and then the final green card application. So if you have a PERM filed 1 year prior, or you have an I-140 approved, your H4 dependent, the spouse, can apply for an H4 EAD. So that's how you get an H4 EAD. Now I'll explain a little bit about how the green card works. There are two ways of getting a green card in the United States. One is family-based and one is employment-based. Now, so if you're on an H and L, you can opt for the employment-based visa category. And if you have a US citizen, like a brother or a parent, they can actually apply for your green card as well through the family-based sponsorship program. I won't touch the family too much. It's more employment-based, so I'll talk about the employment-based. Now, for the H-1Bs, the process is that the employer who is sponsored your H-1B starts the green card process for you. So the process involves a lot of recruitment efforts, showing that you've tried to hire a lot of local US citizens, and somebody who's a green card holder or a US citizen has not been able to qualify for the job. Then the company files a labor process for you. They file a labor for you with the Department of Labor, which primarily covers that there is an opening for a permanent position in the organization, and they are sponsoring this foreign worker for this position. So that's called the labor process or the perm process. Once the perm gets certified by the Department of Labor, it moves into the second stage, which is the I-140, which is actually the immigrant visa process. So then the company sponsors you for the I-140. If the I-140 gets approved, that is your starting ticket to get a green card in the US. Now, it's important that when you file your green card application, which is the third stage, the I-140 being used is from the employer you are actually working for. So you have to make sure that the I-140 being used to file your 485 application is from the employer who's actually filed your I-140, and you have an approval from them through that, for that company. So it's important that if you are in the US on an H visa or an L visa, and you file an I-140 through an employer X, and then you move to another company, or you port to another new employer for career enhancement or whatever, you get another I-140 from the new employer. So there are 3 stages for the green card. Once you enter the US on a non-immigrant visa, which is the H or the L, make sure that your employer also helps you with getting into the green card process, because that's what is going to eventually help you to stay here long term. So you would need the green card process, and there are formalities which the employer has to take care of, and you can work with your employer on getting a green card and get into the path.
Thanks. Before I move to the Canada section of our panel, I just want to ask one final question. This is more from the student side. So, if I'm an Indian Chartered Accountant student, can I get an F1 student visa or a J1 student visa to come and study CA, CPA in the United States? And how do I, if I'm looking for a job here in the United States, what are going to be the ways in which I can get a licensed qualification, which is the CPA? So can you talk a little bit about immigration and education on that space?
Sure.
In that context?
Yeah, so how I understand is that for the CA degrees in India, you actually have to go through a certain articleship, certain amount of education, right? Now, for the United States, they recognize they want you to have a 4 years bachelor's degree back in India, or a 3-year bachelor's degree back in India. So if you want to explore the F1, you will first have to get admission in one of the universities in the United States. But when I say universities, it should not be a blacklisted university. There are a lot of blacklisted universities as well in the US. I would say go to premier schools, get to some of the accredited schools, get an admission there. They will issue you an I-20, which you would use to apply for an F1 visa. A good way of exploring universities would be that you can just, type the name of the state, and you can get any of the state universities' name on Google. And then those universities also have their course curriculums on their websites. You can run through that. You can see what are the courses they offer, and then accordingly talk to the DSO, which is the designated school officer, understand what the courses are, what the courses cover, how the fee works, and then, enroll in an education in that university, get an I-20 and apply for the F1. So studies is not restricted. You can easily explore education in the US through the F1 visa route. You can come here and study, and then eventually, move into the H-1B process through any of the employers in the US, and that will help you to get into the path of employment and green card in the United States. Now, J-1 visa is pretty much it's a visa for internship. So some of the universities in the United States offer internship. You will have to check on those universities. Not all universities have this J1 internship program. So you'll have to talk to the universities and see if they have an internship program, and you can come and do internship here, or, study here, or do an exchange visitors program. They will sponsor the J1 for you. So that's an option through the university side. The other way of getting a J1 is that you'll have to tie up with an agency here. The agency sponsors your J1, and then you come and work for the US employer. So the US employer will have to work with an agency who can help you sponsor the J1, and then the J1 is kind of stamped in India, and then you come here on a J1 visa. J1 does have a little bit of restrictions as far as residency rule and stuff, but it all depends upon how the agency is working and what they kind of include in their form filling and the DS 2019 form. That can be explored. But F1 is definitely one of the routes to enter the US and study education and employment in the US.
Thank you, Deepika, for this great landscape for immigration and education in the United States. The last question of the panel, and I'll turn back to Deepika on this. We've seen a lot of news right now about how there is transition in the United States in terms of the government. What does that really mean in terms of the immigration? I mean, you're close to the immigration landscape. So what are you seeing? Is immigration going to be easy into the United States? Is it going to be difficult? What do people should think about right now?
So the new government is, they are immigration pro. So they are going to work on a lot of new policies and kind of changing a lot of policies which Trump had made. Trump had actually banned all the H&Ls to enter the United States up to December 31st. So they are going to, they're going to make changes to all those policies which Trump had come up in the last 4 years. Nothing has happened yet. We do see changes happening next year. It is probably going to be a little more easier compared to what we've gone through in the last 4 years under this administration. So all I could say is we'll have to wait and watch and see what changes happen in all the policy makings by the new government administration. But what the new thing which we are seeing is they are more, they want to kind of work on the DACA and, DACA cases and the illegal immigrants, trying to give them citizenship and stuff. I've not heard anything happening to the H and the L front so far. But yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of policies which are right now in place through the Trump administration will have changes, but we'll have to just wait and watch.
We've heard of situations where the administration has been given and has followed a policy where they give preference to higher salaries while issuing H1. They've got policies whereby they give higher preference to somebody who's educated in the United States over somebody who's just educated in India. So do you expect those policies to continue, or do you think they will change?
So, those are very good questions, Nilesh. Why does a salary make a difference, right? So the H1B was kind of performed for, people who are skilled workers who are performing critical job duties in the United States and where you can't find a replacement. So obviously salary is inversely proportional with you can say directly proportional to the skill of work you're doing, right? So if you're doing a very skilled work, your salary also will go up higher, right? Because obviously the US employer is not able to find somebody who meets the same requirement or meets the requirement of the job offer. So obviously the higher salaries will help. The higher you are paid, it helps you to get through the H1B process. USCIS also evaluates that when adjudicating the cases. Recently, they did increase the FLC wage rates for all the H1B workers for some of the sanctuary states. For example, New Jersey, New York, all the Bay Area states like, Santa Clara County and stuff like that. They did increase the FLC wages. There is a lawsuit right now which is going on for decreasing that and coming back to the normal, because obviously the employers are not able to afford 208 as the basic wage to pay to an H1B worker. But this is all going to happen in the future. But salaries do make a difference when filing an H1B. The higher you're paid, the chances of getting an approval is always there. Now, coming to the second option of the education, well, they did create something for specific US master's degrees students, because they wanted to give them an option. They were the students went through the whole this thing of education in the US and they wanted to give them opportunity. So they did create a quota system for them where they said that the lottery will have 20,000 seats only for the US masters, which was done on purpose just so that they could retain these employees, these students for some extra time under OPT and then eventually train them and, explore them for future employment. So there is always an advantage of doing education in the US because, you've gone through the whole education system here. So that's not going to change. I don't think that's ever going to change. That's always going to be there.
The final question which I have for you, Deepika, and before we close out the panel is, how do I get my CA degree evaluated in the United States? I briefly touched upon it, but if you can share some more light into it as to how do I get it evaluated in such a way that it's considered equivalent to a master's degree?
So master's degree will be difficult. So as you know that US honors the 16 years of education. So as I understand, the BCom degree in India is just 3 years. and then you go through the ICAI associate membership program where you get the where you get the certificate. So when you evaluate the degree from India in the United States, it's going to be only a bachelor's degree. Now we also use WES for our evaluations. The CPA board kind of uses that for evaluation purpose. So if you have a BCom degree and you've done your articleship and you've got the ICAI certificate, that's going to be equated to a bachelor's degree in the United States, which is good enough to file an H1B, by the way. So you have to basically meet a bachelor's degree. The master's degree is only if you have like a 16-year of education from India. If you've done 16 years of education, then you might qualify for the master's degree in the US equivalent when you kind of equate it. But technically, the way the CA degree works in India and the way the CAs go through the education process, their degrees are usually evaluated as a bachelor's degree in the United States. Unless they come and do a US master's. If they do a US master's, then obviously they have a master's and they'll be considered as master's students. But other than that, it's always a bachelor's degree.
Okay. But the CA qualification in India is essentially 12 years plus 4 years, right? So there is a 16 years of education that a chartered accountant would go through. I mean, I'm talking about somebody who's completed his CA, not somebody who is pursuing a CA.
Right. So you know what, the EDGE database, what happens is when the education evaluations are done and when you go to one of these evaluation companies, they use the EDGE database, and USCIS also uses the EDGE database. For some reason, the education treaty between US and India for some degrees are still evaluated as bachelor's. So till EDGE doesn't change that to a 16-year education, you will not be able to get like a... So when it's a 16 years education, it's still a bachelor's degree, right? It's 12 plus 4. So it's still a bachelor's degree. When you talk about masters, the additional 2 years is a master's degree, right? In India, it's, when you do a graduation. So in order to do 16 plus 2, then you end up getting a master's degree. But if you're just doing the 16 years of education, it's still going to be considered as a bachelor's degree in the United States. And that's what EDGE follows. Unfortunately, we have to just be with that as a bachelor's,
Okay. I think we're running out of time, so I'll close the panel. This topic about education and credentials is very useful, and we probably will cover this once again in one of our next webcasts. But with this, I'd like to end and thank you, Deepika, Neera, and Vijayji, for sharing your thoughts about the immigration and education landscape in the United States and Canada.